and their importance. And, oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, sorry. So our group project is talking about Women's Center and the importance of them. It is 6 of us in this group, myself, Ansley, Alexandra, Taylor, and Morgan. And we've been working, oh, and Alyssa, and we've been working all semester to just kind of spread awareness through our website on different topics related to feminism and women and the importance of women's centers, like I said.
So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of introduce what women's centers are. I'm sure a lot of y'all already know what they are, but they're basically facilities, usually on campuses, that provide a variety of services to gender minorities that mostly includes women, but oftentimes they also work with other minority groups on campus. They provide a safe space, they can provide counseling, sometimes they'll have a resource center, just anything that can help women and other gender minorities get through life on college campus. And then I think Alexandra is going to introduce our panelists for today.
Hi, I'm Alexandra, and first I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. So we have 5 amazing panelists who came today, so thank you all for coming. So we're gonna first start off with Amber and then just go through all the panelists. And Amber, can you tell us what your role with the Women's Center was and what impact did your work with this Women's Center have on you personally?
Yeah, sure. So I worked at the Women's Center for 2 years. I was a grad assistant there from 2012 to 2014. And that was a time in my life when I was going through things. And so being at the Women's Center and being able to work there taught me a lot about community and having support. It meant a lot to me in a personal way to like have that sense of community and that safe space. Jennifer was amazing, is amazing, continues to be amazing. And that has stayed with me. So it's not like I was there and then I left and that was the end of the Women's Center. It was like, this is still a source of support that I've had even as I've left. In the related way, because as an academic, you're a professional and your personal life are super connected. But I learned a lot about feminist issues and a lot about issues of race and issues of class, things that I wasn't very aware of really when I started there. And in a lot of ways that has directly informed my research agenda now and the things that I pursue professionally now. So I think in a personal way, the Women's Center really shaped, I feel like, who I am. And then in a professional way, really helped me to understand some of the issues that I deal with and work with in my professional life now. So yeah.
Thank you. Kelly, would you like to answer this question as well? Of how that, just telling your role with the Women's Center here at Georgia College, and then what your what impacted your work on you personally?
I think that's me, unless there's another Kelly. Okay, I'll go. I know my name on here says KJ. That's just what I go by in grad school, but also go by Kelly. I was there from 2015 to like 2018-ish, around there. And similar to what Amber was saying, just a lot of professional development and personal development. One of the main reasons I went to grad school for sex education was the things I learned through Project Brave and educating through them and like facilitating kind of like grew my passion for that. And I kind of think on it a lot and comment on it a lot in my grad school classes, just like facilitation, things of that sort. And Yeah, I mean, honestly, Amber pretty much said it all, that it's a place for growth, and it's not just, you know, an academic space, but it's also a personal and comfortable space. Um, from, you know, the little meetings and the little activities to the vagina monologues and just the small things that I remember when we moved to the hub, that was a big deal. I'm sure that's, no one really remembers the little basement, but you know, all those good things. So it was just a great place to be, and something that I always, when I think of my Georgia College experience, I always think about the Women's Center. Other than that, I think that's all I got to say.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to tell us about your role in the Women's Center and what impact did your work have on you personally?
Yeah, I will totally gush about how much I love the Women's Center and all of the things that I, of course, was honored enough to participate with. It, like Kelly said, I was there when they were still in the basement. I was originally there in 2014 to 2016 when I graduated. I was really, I was part of Project Brave as a peer facilitator. I also helped found the student group with Katie Pruitt, who's also on this call, called Braveheart. I also got to do the vagina monologues, which to this day, my short skirt remains one of my favorite pieces of poetry ever, just because it's so much fun. And how it impacted me is being a peer facilitator was really important to me, simply because I know, like, it takes practice talking about difficult subjects, especially when it comes to domestic violence, sexual violence, interpersonal violence, just anything that could possibly just upset anyone. And it's really terrifying. But Jennifer Graham and Melissa basically were just like, you can do this. And that's amazing, to be on a college campus where it's like two women showing you how to do this and take charge of a situation and like actually affect change. And that's how the Women's Center came through for me when I was there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Mom Boy, would you like to let us know about your role that you played in the Women's Center, and also how did that impact like you personally?
Yeah, I was an intern this past spring just before I graduated. And so, but before that, I had been working in and out with the Women's Center, whether it was through, I was a peer health educator working with Health Movement, or when I was also employed in a different office in the same building, I would still work in conjunction with the Women's Center. And so I've done quite a bit of work with Miss Jennifer and with Miss Melissa over the past couple of years since I was at Georgia College. I think for me, the biggest takeaway I took from the Women's Center was the sense of community. It didn't matter if it was the first time you were in the hub, or it was your 10,000th time you're in the hub. You would see a face and everyone is so friendly and kind and there to support you and help you, regardless of whether they've just known you for 5 seconds or for 10 seconds. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I still gush about even here, where I'm like, do you guys have a Women's Center? And all of that. So yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Katie, would you like to tell us about your role that you played in the Women's Center, and then what impact did your work with the Women's Center have on you personally?
Yeah, so I was at Georgia College from 2012 through 2016. I started Braveheart with Liz. That was a really big learning moment for all of us. My first year of college, I was sexually assaulted at Georgia College, and I was about to leave Georgia College altogether. And I found the Women's Center actually through my own mother. And Jennifer has just been one of those people who comes in your life and never leaves. So I want people to understand that women's centers are about personal growth, but they're also about academic and professional growth. So while I was at Georgia College, I learned leadership through Braveheart. I learned organizational skills. I learned how to make mistakes and grow through it and suck it up and say that you'll do it better next time and it's going to be okay. I learned how to provide advocacy and support, but also how to receive advocacy and support. I've gained lifelong friendships, and some of the girls, Liz is one of my greatest friends to this day. And I also got connection to resources I really needed at the time. They're able to get me counseling resources. They're able to teach me about what sexual assault looks like and that it wasn't my fault, about what domestic violence looks like, which was a long pattern in my family. And I didn't even fully understand that before I had people explain to me just what generational trauma looks like. I also, I learned all about feminism, about the history, about the politics behind it, how you move the movement forward in the modern day. We also had men in Braveheart, and that was just really important to have men be a safe space, to be an ally. And I guess also to learned research skills through Braveheart and through being a peer facilitator, learned marketing and outreach skills. I also learned networking skills. I actually got my first job out of college because of the Women's Center. And I got that job through somebody who is on the board for the local domestic violence agency. And I've gone back to the Women's Center since I've graduated. Melissa and Jennifer have written me letters to get into graduate school. I worked in domestic violence shelters for 4 years after I graduated. I'm finishing an MSW program at UGA now, and I work for a federally qualified health center. So I'm providing care coordination to people across 18 counties, which does mean, like, in the work that I do now, it means providing domestic violence awareness and education, because you would not believe the amount of doctors and nurses who don't know how to identify the signs of domestic violence, who don't know the resources that they have in their own communities, and they don't know how to provide support to the victims. So being able to provide that trauma-informed training to them, I could not have done it without the amazing support of the Women's Centers. And I'm going to shut up now because I could go on forever about how amazing that every college needs a Women's Center. But yeah, that was my experience at Georgia College.
Thank you very much for everyone sharing that. Also, if anybody here has any questions for the participants, you're more than welcome to ask them in the chat, and we will make sure that they get answered as well. So if anybody has any questions right now for them, they would love to answer them.
Alexandra, I do want to pop in and let you know that Chidinma, who is also one of our panelists, is in the room. And so I want to make sure that Chidinma gets a chance to speak to everybody as well.
Okay, I didn't know she was in here.
That's okay.
Okay. But if you, how do you say your name? Chidinma. Okay.
Chidinma is fine.
If you would like to also share your experience, like your role that you played in the Women's Center, as well as like the impact that your work with the Women's Center had on you, we would love to hear it as well.
Yeah. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Melissa. It's nice seeing you guys. Okay. So I started in the Women's Center 2016. And that was like literally we started from the basement and then we got into the hub. I feel the Women's Center really was a community. I think everyone that spoke really, really read my mind. And it's interesting to see that everyone that has something to do with the Women's Center had that impact I had individually. So it's not just a one person thing, but it's kind of pierced through everyone's heart and soul. So there's no way that you would know about the Women's Center and you are involved in it and it won't impact you one way or the other. So I worked as a student assistant, I guess I've forgotten the name, but when I was there, something I really admired, Jennifer was a very wonderful leader. Then she was going through her PhD program and it was like a process and she carries us along with it. So it was like she was also setting a milestone for each of us. Like I felt personally, I felt she was setting a milestone because of how dedicated she was. She's a mother, she works, and then she puts her whole soul and body into what she does, So as a lady, seeing a woman as strong as Jennifer, it really motivated me as an individual. Also, the Women's Center really gave me the strength to speak, taught me a lot about advocacy, taught me a lot about about being myself and embracing different aspects of individualism, if I'll say that. Like, you know, we're totally different and it's fine for us to be different, but this is what we have on the table. How do we bring our differences together to create an impact in our community or in our society? So we had lovely people, or we worked as a team most times. I know Jennifer took it upon herself to have this on Fridays, at least like a 1 hour meeting where we just talk about something educative and random, just to hear people's perspective. And something I really admired about that is that it's okay for everyone to think differently and also respect each other's view why they speak, and not try to be very what you say, like very like when you're just being so myopic in the way you view and just feeling like your own way is the right way. And I carried that in my heart everywhere I went to. Even as I was working after I left the Women's Center, it really showed me different perspective about people, embracing the different words, because that's another thing I learned too. I know Melissa took her time to teach us about all those like terminologies about like pansexual, transgender, all those things. Like, you know, it's not you know, she had that time to like explain what they are. You know, we learn things about nouns, and it's okay to ask someone what you prefer the person to be called by, what noun would you prefer. Like, it's okay, like the best way to approach such kind of you know, communication with someone. So it's been it's the Women's Center is not just a place that, yes, is there for women, but it's also like a lifestyle that impacted me educationally, emotionally, and in the way I view and speak to people that are different from me. So it's really a wonderful place that that I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to work in.
That's awesome. So we actually have a question from the chat, and any of the panelists can feel free to chip in, because I know a couple of y'all mentioned this. But what kind of takeaways did y'all have from like working with the Women's Center as far as professional development goes?
So I'll answer that. I actually went in a completely different direction after I left Georgia College. I worked as a sexual assault advocate right after I left, but then I quickly shifted to technologies. Actually, I'm actually an app developer now, which is weird because when I tell people that I worked with the Women's Center and this is my background, they're like, how does that actually translate to technologies and like building out innovative solutions? Intersectional feminism is probably one of the tenets of my design when I come into the room with something, because with intersectional feminism, it's something that we talked about a lot at my time at the Women's Center. You have to think about every single person that's going to interact with your application, and you have to be able to meet them in such a way and understand and like plug in that you're actually going to give them something that they want and not just something that you think they want. So like just that radical empathy is something that like I took away and I still carry into like my professional life, because it makes me both a better developer, but it also makes me a better person, and people like working with better people, especially when they're kind. So yeah, that was my professional takeaway.
I'll also answer this, and I just like to say that the personal is political, and that is a quote by Bell Hooks. If you haven't read anything by her and you're looking to know more about feminism, I would encourage you to do so. But it plays into every aspect of your life, and the way that you view things affects your behavior, and it behaves the way that you interpret your environment. So when you go to somewhere like a Women's Center and you're interacting with people who have had different backgrounds, who, like Liz said, they're intersectional feminists, viewing everybody's personal experiences and understanding how they came to be, learning all about different types of gender and sexuality, learning about different races and backgrounds and cultures. It influences the way that you advocate for yourself, and it influences the way that you advocate for your community. And the Women's Center does a lot of trainings and activities throughout the year for college students. They did a women's salary negotiation workshop right before I graduated, that I was able to be a part of, for example. And having somebody, Jennifer, who led that was older, that had, had so much work experience, who was able to give us advice on how to make sure that we got closer to an equal salary as a man, because let's face it, we still don't have that doesn't exist. But being able to recognize that you have more bargaining power than you thought you did. And also too, just learning how to put together your resume, having Jennifer, having Melissa, who were able to be there for you in just a mentorship type role. There's so many things that especially women do that we don't give ourselves enough credit for. And just having that mentorship opportunity at a women's center to help you put together your resume, to help you consider taking on different leadership or different opportunities, even helping connect you with jobs. Because Melissa had told me about the domestic violence shelter that I ended up working for. One of the board members was connected with the Georgia College Women's Center. She was the director of the sexual assault advocacy program. And so I was, that gave me the door to get the interview, and it led into a dream job for me. And through that work was how I decided to go back to school for my master's degree. So, there's so much professional development that you can get from the Women's Center. And all you have to do is ask. And I think it increases the economic outcomes for women when we have support like this for each other. It improves our job outcomes, just having solidarity with each other.
Okay, thank you all for sharing that. That was also really, really interesting to hear both of y'all's answers. But on a different note, how would y'all, any of the panelists can also answer this. How did y'all see your work with the Women's Center interact with your school experience?
I can go ahead and answer that.
You got it.
So I graduated with a degree in public health, and part of the public health curriculum is taking two classes related to women's health. And so in the classroom, you learn the textbook definitions of everything. You don't learn the experiences. You don't talk to people. You just learn what the textbook says. And I mean, Dr. Butler does a very good job at explaining all of those, but sometimes just having to interact with, people who identify as a different gender, like understanding their perspective. I think the Women's Center helped me specifically get that kind of personal interaction, because I can read what a textbook defines it as, but when I talk to someone and they tell me what it means to them to identify as that gender, then I can actually get it. Also, the Women's Center had a very great resource library that I would find myself sitting there for hours, just reading through the books and just learning about advocacy work and different experiences. And there was a nice book, I forget the title, but it was short stories about different people going through different things. And I think that helped me, with a public health perspective, understand women's issues a little bit better, gender issues a little bit better, rather than just like a presentation or a documentary. Like I could actually get hands-on information. And also being a peer health educator, it helped me with how we develop our content and how we make sure our health information suits everybody and isn't just generic, because I learned from my time at the Women's Center is people do get left behind because we just use the generic format of how, you know, we talk about sexual health. We don't cover everybody. We just say, hey, here's a condom, use it. You know, so my time at the Women's Center helped me like, okay, how do we get everybody involved? It helped me understand the intersectionality of how health works. And I'm grateful for that.
I'll jump in after that. Similar to that, I did a minor in community health, so I was in some of the public health classes. And I felt like kind of what like Mom Bob was saying, that it's like you're in the classes and you're reading the books, but you're not really like as active in it. And then being a facilitator and then being in campus and stuff like that, you're kind of taking those lessons that you had and you're viewing your college classes and the students and the topics through that lens. And I remember I was in some, I think it was just like public health 101 or something like that. And I remember we watched this video of this guy, it was some YouTuber, showing how easy it was to drug girls' drinks. I don't know why we were watching that, but the professor afterwards was like, okay, so like, what are the takeaways? Like, what do we think about this, ladies? Like specifically to the ladies. And the girls were like, I guess like watch your drinks. And I was like, what is going on in this class right now? This was like 2017, you know, it wasn't like 1990s. And so after class, I was like, hey, like, are you doing like, have you been contacted about doing like a brave training for your class? Because we were doing like a lot of like in-class things like that. She was like, oh yeah, like I think I'm supposed to do one of those. And I was like, well, you know, I'd love to like sign you up for one. And I remember me and Jack Circle, if y'all know him, we went in and we talked about that video, because I was talking about like, you know, bystander intervention and victim blaming and things like that. And that the goal is to be an active bystander and not just be like, oh, well, victims need to not, you know, walk home alone or like cover your drink or have like that color changing nail polish. And if you don't, then like that's on you kind of thing. And I was like, you know, no offense to, I don't even remember their name. I was like, no offense to you, ma'am, but that video, like, you know, that is kind of like ends up being potentially an issue because you're showing people like, look how easy it is to drug your drink. Like you turned around for half a second and now you're being drugged, that kind of thing. And she ended up being like, you know what, like, you're right. I'm not going to show that video anymore. I'm like, you can show it and talk about victim blaming society. But just kind of like, you know, any other person in that class, like I feel like was just kind of taking it and they were like, yeah, you know, I should watch my drink, or like, yeah, girls should watch their drinks. And instead, like we kind of took, or at least I took my facilitation lens into that class and I was like, why are we even watching this video? So I think that during my time at Georgia College, I was always like on the prowl in my classes. I'm like, okay, like, are we gonna start victim blaming? Or like in one of Dr. Butler's classes, we were looking at different vulvas and stuff. And I remember looking around and like a lot of the women were like shrinking down in their seats and they're like, we're looking at vulvas because, you know, we've seen penises on all kinds of screens, but it's rare to see one, anything other than like a white pornographic vulva, but then to see like multiple different kinds with, you know, different kinds of people and sizes and races and different levels of hair. They weren't all just hairless. And it's sad to think that people were uncomfortable with that. So I was just kind of like sitting there like, okay, like, you know, we got to be better about sex education and bystander intervention and facilitation and things of that sort.
I'll just KJ, if I can call you that. That was really lovely for you to like give the story and explain everything and being so in depth with your story and everything. It's such a wonderful story. And I really feel like, so after I finished school, I worked for a year or so in a feminist women's health center. It was like an advocacy, community development, everything, and then healthcare. And also after that, I went back to get my nursing degree. So currently being a nurse, I feel in a from the Women's Center, everything KJ just said just makes so much sense, because it's like Women's Center taught me how to be comfortable to approach things like that, and approaching it in a very rightful way. Like what KJ said, like being able to have that courage to walk up to the teacher and giving the teacher the time to like finish up in the class, and then you came to the teacher to now like express yourself in the right way. And that's something I've seen myself during my nursing program like doing, because it's like it's very it's a more of a women's career, but we had a couple of men in my class, so it was a very interesting thing, especially when we had OB/GYN and clinical rotation and all that. So, but I felt like exactly what KJ said, like it just, Women's Center taught me how to really stand up and really get comfortable about things, saying things out, talking about sexuality, talking about using the right terminology, why explaining things to different people and not shying away from all those things. So yeah, I just wanted to tell KJ thank you for sharing that.
Wait, did you just say you worked for Feminist Women's Health Center?
Yes, I did in Atlanta.
I also worked for Feminist Women's Health Center.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
When was that?
I did the Woolley fellowship with them.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't do any actual nursing.
Yeah, I worked with Katie May and Lee. I don't know if you know them, but
No, Lee is one of my favorite people. She like still, I almost in my head, I call her Jennifer 2.0. Like the person, when I came to Atlanta, she was that first person that like really showed me like the ropes of like how to get involved in Atlanta, which is really cool. That's really awesome. I just wanted to say that.
Does anybody have any questions so far for any of our panelists? We just want to make sure you can say them out loud or in the chat.
Can you please give us like an update of what the Women's Center is, or what the hub, or the Women's Center Braveheart, what it's the progress it's been since for this year through this COVID and everything? What has it been, or what has been the progress so far?
I guess I can take that one. So we have been, plugging along, still, figuring out how we do our programming virtually. So we've been partnering with this class to offer regular programming, which has been a really cool thing for folks from way back when we were still in the basement. This series very much reminds me of the Women on Wednesday series that we had back in the day. And so it's been really, really nice to have that kind of a feel of a program again. We figured out how to bring Project Brave training to all of the incoming students virtually this year. So Melissa and I spent a huge amount of time figuring out what that was going to look like, and how we could transition Brave trainings into a virtual format, how we transition Star Ally, which is our safe space training program, into a virtual format. And so we've done a lot of that, and then focusing on, because folks are feeling so distanced, have really focused on how do we bring people into community together, and how do we create those spaces where folks can be alongside each other and have just space for solidarity. I hope that answers what you were hoping to hear, Chidinma. Okay.
I really think that's the most powerful part of the Women's Center, is y'all's ability to just make space, like not just a physical space, but a space for conversation, a space for openness. Yeah, I think there is power in like setting aside that space and time, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and Dr. S actually just put it in the chat, but all of the events that we've done with the GC2Y, working with the Women's Center, are actually on the Georgia College Women's Center's YouTube and their Facebook page. If y'all are interested, there's been anything from women's bodies, feminism, and now this.
Okay, so I have a question for this can be answered by anyone on the panel and as well as our audience. So this question is, how do you understand the importance of women's centers like on campus?
Maybe I can speak to this if that's okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I teach at another university right now where I'm finishing up my PhD, and I had a student come to me, a female student was having some things going on. And I was like, we're gonna get you taken care of. We'll get you to the Women's Center. We'll get you some resources. And I sit down and I start looking and I'm like, we don't have a Women's Center here. I did not it never occurred to me, because that was such an integral part of my experience at Georgia College, that like I knew in my mind people don't have women's centers, but I didn't really realize what it was like to be on a campus without a women's center. And so that was something that it reminded me of the importance of this, not only in professional and personal growth and development, but also in time of need and in time of difficulty. I don't have anywhere to refer my students. And that's very problematic as somebody who is trying to network and help students get where they need to be and get the support that they need. And so it really resonated, like this is such a crucial need on campus. And it's so problematic when campuses don't have women's centers and aren't able to provide that support to their students. So I love my campus, not to down my campus, but they need a women's center. They do.
So I had a friend and she was deaf. And so she was starting UGA. She was an incoming freshman. And so she had asked me to accompany her to their freshman orientation to make sure that she understood all of the information that they were providing, also with her nerves and being in such a large environment. She just wanted somebody to sit there with her and help her navigate the space. And I didn't think anything else of it. Like, just thought it was going to be like normal, get through the hour for the sake of your friend. And then at the end of the session, literally after the dining hall had already spoken about the meal plans that you can buy and the importance of eating apples every day, they're like, oh, wait, we have one more speaker, almost like they almost forgot about it. And their Title IX coordinator stood up and she was like, and keep in mind, this is, students and their parents, there's easily 500 to 1,000 people in this room. And she was like, raise your hand if you've ever heard of Title IX. And I kid you not, I was the only person that raised my hand. And I'm looking around, people are like snickering and laughing. And I looked one parent dead in the eye and I said, it's not funny. Your child may need these services one day. And if you don't know where to find help, then their education is going to suffer. And that's how vital that it is that these connections to resources can be the reason that a student remains enrolled in their university. It can remain the reason that they pass their classes versus fail their classes. It can be the difference in them turning to substances to cope with their feelings rather than going and getting the counseling that they need to get through the experience. It's the difference in the academic and professional and social enrichment that come with the Women's Center versus going into a workforce unprepared to deal with issues of sexual assault in the workplace, of just general organizational leadership. And so it's astounding. And being at UGA now, from the master's degree perspective, they are vehemently opposed to a women's center on campus. And it is political. I don't know why, but I will tell you that several people have tried starting women's center there and they don't want it. And I that is something that I just totally will never be able to fully understand. I think every college should have a women's center to where you can, at the very minimum, to where you have a safe space to get resources that you may need to, and at least a safe space to make your decision moving forward, right? Because we never want to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do in a situation or how they should respond, but at least having the space to process and decide what they want moving forward for themselves. And if you don't have that, it's just such an incredibly isolating experience. And I will say I wore orange today for Miss Eve Puckett. I don't know which one of you, how many of y'all know of Miss Eve. Miss Eve was our Title IX coordinator at Georgia College. And she was an incredible resource. She was hands-on in the community. I actually met her. I was writing a journalism article on women's centers, and I was trying to get answers. They were kind of trying to skirt around me at that point. The Women's Center hadn't done all their training with them yet. They weren't where they are now. They were trying to give me the skirt around, and Eve just bangs down the door and she says, "Y'all are going to talk to this young lady. What's your name?" "I'm Eve." "Did you know I'm the Title IX coordinator? We need to talk. We need to get coffee. I need to know you." And I just felt so heard and understood by her in that moment. And I did. I mean, I personally and professionally, she was just kind of the it girl on campus. Her last words actually to me were, "You'll be an amazing advocate, and I would like to see you doing this work in your career." And so she was able to let people know what their options for reporting and moving forward in the process. And if people don't know about it, if they don't have the Eve in their life, then where do you go? And you try to handle it on your own. And I don't think that we should stand for that at all.
It's honestly kind of sad looking at how few women's centers there are across the country. Like Dr. S mentioned in the chat, there's only 400 or less across the country of over 4,000 college and university campuses. And as I was doing some research, they're often the first to go whenever funding becomes an issue. And because of that, there's such a wide variety of abilities of women's centers on campuses. Some of them are just this little bitty space. Others are more fortunate, but just having anything honestly makes a difference.
One of my favorite parts about women's centers and their importance on campus is that they're innovation stations, essentially, because you take a bunch of people who otherwise wouldn't have a voice on campus, wouldn't have all these resources, and then you put them in a room together and you say, "Here's all the stuff you can possibly do." Because I remember when I first met Jennifer Graham, I was coming to her from student government, and I didn't know anything. They just they said, "You're the director of multicultural affairs," which, by the way, look at me. We can take a moment and find that hilarious. And I was like, "Jennifer, what can we do? What can student government do?" And she's like, "Oh, I have a project for you. Here you go." And for me, and that's how I met Katie. And it was just this beautiful moment because even now I carry that into my life with startups that I work with. It's just this idea of you have to find that perfect formula. And the Women's Center literally just bottled that up, put it on a shelf, and made it accessible to anyone.
And I will say to parents too. So I think one of the things is, how do you balance in between a student's independence as they're growing into college, as they're becoming an adult? And then how do you also navigate a student's confidentiality and right to self-determination? And the Women's Center here does a really good job of that. And so it's really vital that we're able to pass that resource along to parents as well as to students. And that's one thing that the Women's Center has been able to do by incorporating the bystander intervention training into the freshman orientation, is that now this knowledge is accessible to everyone who may need it. And you may never know it. The education on the parents component may help them help somebody in the community, aside from the university, or it may help them if their child student comes to them and finally discloses that something happened to them and they're not quite sure what to do. And it opens avenues of discussion too amongst other women. Like Liz said, like, I was at my aunt's wedding, she went to UGA, and she was in a sorority, and they're like they're very put together sorority, but they're also a bunch of women that really like to connect and do things together. And they were like, what do you mean? UGA doesn't have a women's center? Who do we write to about that? My daughter goes there. Like, that's not okay, But I want all of our daughters to be safe. And I was like, well, and their sons too. And like, oh yeah, everybody, and that's how I like to think of it, is it needs to be a space for everybody to grow and learn and have connection to resources and to feel safe,
Yeah, and Katie, just to go off of that, I feel like sometimes when the traditional classroom fails, the Women's Center really comes in and like fills all that whole, like what you said before of just like finding what everyone has said before of just like finding this community. It's incredible, because like without that space, like I don't think I would have even become friends with Katie, which makes me really sad because she's one of my favorite people. So like, but there's also, it's really powerful being in a space where it's the difference between being told you should do it and being told that you can do it. It's like a group and an organization and two really powerful women that I still look up to. I'm pointing at them in the boxes, but I just realized that everybody has different box layouts. But yeah, I'll stop now.
So clearly, as everyone here is a lover of women's centers, generally, everybody here loves the GC Women's Center, and there are a lot of advocates for various things in this room. So my question to people is, what can we do to make sure that the Women's Center at Georgia College
I'm sorry, for me, I think the last part of your sentence cut off.
Sorry, what can we do to make sure that the Women's Center at Georgia College thrives? What can we do as advocates, as students, as faculty, as lovers of women's centers?
Go to all the events. And also just being comfortable talking to people that you otherwise wouldn't talk to on campus. I remember one of the biggest barriers that I had to overcome in talking about sexual violence was getting used to talking to fraternities about it, because there's this idea that all frat boys are evil and terrible and awful. And I honestly came into my first facilitator training with a fraternity scared. I was like, oh no, what are these men going to say to me? And it ended up being one of the best facilitations I've ever done. And it's just overcoming that idea that you only have to talk to certain people about feminism. It's getting out of your bubble. It's like asking someone who, Chris Oglesby, who was our treasurer for Braveheart, literally didn't even know what a feminist was. He was like, what, there's girls there? Of course I'll go. And then he ended up becoming one of our strongest advocates ever. And he's still I'm still really good friends with him. We ended up being roommates. he wouldn't have been involved in the movement if I hadn't like gotten my head out of my own self to talk to him about it.
I think also too, being able to talk with people about your experiences and about their own experiences, and being able to connect that with a broader movement, right? So in some situations, it could be that there's a program at the Women's Center for that, or there's a resource at the Women's Center for that, or there's a person at the Women's Center for that. But in other circumstances, it's saying, oh, well, there isn't a person or a resource or a thing for that, and maybe there should be. And being able to learn and grow in that capacity is in, what is the need of the community, kind of a needs assessments kind of thing. What is the research behind it? Going to Jennifer and Melissa and saying, is this something that we can do? Is this something that's needed? And just doing it and moving forward with it. One of the best examples of that was Braveheart, because we did everything entirely wrong with Braveheart, but then it worked at the end, and that's okay. But we also did everything right with Braveheart at the end, and so it was being not afraid to take the plunge. It was being not afraid to put yourself out there. I don't think Liz and I for one second thought about whether or not people wanted Braveheart. We just knew we wanted Braveheart, and that was all that really mattered. And so probably our first presentation that we did, we actually angered this guy that was running for president of Georgia College or something. And it was our first chance of like, oh, wait, like people don't always agree with you, but it's just getting yourself to the point where you feel comfortable enough with that. And you also allow yourself to have the adult and professional support to help you process that, right? And to be able to help you figure out where you need to go from there. What are the strengths and opportunities on your end, but what are the strengths and opportunities within the community as well? And how can you use that moment where things went really good or really bad as a teaching moment for yourself and for your organization and for whatever you're trying to do? So there's a lot of ways you can get involved in the Women's Center. And if you don't want to start something on campus, like Liz said, you could always just start by showing up at a movie screening or a Zoom, like you're all here now, like you're doing something for the Women's Center. So yeah.
Katie also downplayed her role in that meeting where that guy got really mad at us. He basically came at us not knowing what he was talking about, and Katie basically gave him the old 1-2 of facts and reality. And it was, to this day, probably my favorite like telling offs ever. I channel that sometimes when I'm leading meetings. I'm like, okay, I got it. Katie Pruitt, Katie Pruitt, Katie Pruitt.
That is true. He this, as a backstory, I guess Liz reminded me I probably should have explained this a little bit better. I was just getting really excited about the ways that y'all could learn and grow from a Women's Center, and didn't get as much into the story of that. But this guy was running for student body president, but he had dressed up as that football player that sexually assaulted a woman in one of the bars downtown and was going around making fun about it. So I literally asked him why he dressed up that way for Halloween, if he really supported women, he really supported women's centers.
In the middle of a meeting.
And he didn't have an answer. So I guess that's also another, sometimes it's just calling people out on their bullshit, Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to challenge people and ask a difficult question, especially if it is going to propel your movement forward, because there were the people who said you shouldn't have said that and how dare you. But I luckily had Melissa, who was a wonderful advocate for us and said, you guys, no, that's okay. Like, you shouldn't have done that. And just remember too, sometimes being silent is choosing the side of the oppressor. So sometimes you have to be the one to stand up in a difficult situation, and not be afraid to tell somebody that what they're saying there's a better way than what they're saying, you know?
I think that also comes along with like calling your own bullshit and like noticing your own shortcomings and being okay with like not understanding something to its full extent. And I think the way you can show up for the Georgia College Women's Center is just being aware that you can bring a women's center anywhere. You can be the women's center. You can be that resource for somebody, or you can be that voice for somebody, or you could just even listen and learn, because learning is so valuable. Because the more you know, like the more things you can pull out at meetings when stuff is happening.
A really good point.
All of that was great, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I know that we could probably talk for a really long time about how awesome the Women's Center is. But I just want to thank the panelists once again for coming and speaking. Y'all were awesome, and we wanted to make sure that the audience didn't have any last minute questions before we go.
I just wanted to appreciate like Jennifer for reaching out to me on Facebook the best way she could. Like it's really nice that she used other means apart from email, I guess now that people don't really, I don't check my email that much anymore. But yeah, I just appreciate that you guys put this together, and it's really lovely seeing faces and having this conversation and talking, hearing everyone's experience and everyone's feeling about it. It just brings back a lot of joy and, you know, happiness and peace to my heart, knowing that I've been in a space that has been appreciated by different people, and we are all in different places and different parts of life, and we still can share on something that can make us laugh and smile on the camera.
Yes, thank you to Jennifer and Melissa too for helping us get all of these amazing people, and for your contributions too. So if nobody has any questions, I guess that's it. Thank you for coming.
Bye. Have a good
Thank you
week.
for having us.
Veterans Day tomorrow. Bye.
Everybody, thank you. It's good to see you.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to see all your faces.